I've been eyeing up doing a spiral cutterhead on my Dewalt DW735 for about a year now, but because of the cost of bringing it into Canada, I just couldn't justify it. When Busy Bee Tools, a Canadian-based company, added the CX735 Spiral head to their lineup of Craftex tools, I knew there was finally an option that would work for me. Busy Bee was nice enough to send me the Spiral cutting head to install into my Dewalt planer. So I want to share with you how the install process goes, as well as the improvement it made to my DW735 planer. After unplugging the planer, I removed the top cover and the 3 thumb screws holding down the dust cover. The dust cover just needs to be twisted slightly to remove it from the blower. I should point out, I am following the instructions, but I personally jumped ahead a few steps and removed the blades and the blade hold downs. I've got a healthy phobia of sharp objects, so, you know. By the way, if you follow the link in the description, you'll find the product, as well as on Busy Bee's website, they have full color versions of the instruction manuals for you to follow. I found this super helpful in a sea of black and yellow. Moving on, we removed the hand crank and the right side panel. If you have any questions throughout this process, feel free to ask them in the comments below. If you haven't subscribed already, I'd love to see you hit that button, as well as the notification bell. By far, the most helpful tool in this whole project were my snap ring pliers. They are super janky, but it took away so much frustration that would have otherwise occurred. I could remove the spring from the chain tensioner and then move on to removing the sprocket and chain. I'm not sure if this was the best way to do this, but I put an Allen key between the chain and the sprocket to prevent it from turning while I used an Allen key to loosen the bolts on the opposing side. Okay, when you remove the cutting head lock plate, keep pressure downwards on it. This will prevent the spring from flying off into oblivion when the screws are removed. With everything cleared out of the way, I could remove the drive belt from the main pulley. I took my time with this, slowly turning the belt while working it off the pulley. Now the pulley can be removed, but be careful not to lose the keyway, like I almost did. Back over to the other side of the planer, I could remove the 3 bolts holding the gearbox and slide this out of the way. I don't suggest removing this all the way, just pull it out enough where you can turn it 90 degrees and let it sit in place. This will give you access to the pinion gear, which needs to be removed. A new one is included in this upgrade kit, by the way. Buried in a layer of grease, there's a large R-ring holding the stock cutter head in place. There's a second R-ring on the other side of the stock cutter head. This can be removed easily with a set of needle nose pliers. I missed this at first, but there is a spacer ring on the drive belt side of the planer that you'll need to remove. Okay, it's time to get out the stock cutter head. It's a scrap of wood against the bearing on the gearbox side of the planer. Then I used this scrap to hammer out the cutter head from the carriage. Unlike other cutter heads that are out there, the bearings on the CX735 do not come installed. If the bearings were installed, you'd have to remove every single insert from the spiral cutter head to be able to insert it into the carriage. Now with the CX735 cutter head, you can easily tilt the cutter head in from the top side of the planer and then hammer the bearings into place. Now I did use a scrap of wood to put even pressure on the bearing as I was hammering it into the carriage. Then, once the bearing was flush with the carriage, I used the socket extension to hammer the bearing in the rest of the way. This was not the right tool for the job, so I was careful to make sure that I was putting equal pressure on both the inside and outside of the bearing. The R-rings on each side of the cutter head also work as a depth gauge, so you know how far in your bearings need to go. From here on in, it's basically repeating all the steps in reverse, starting with installing the new pinion gear that's included with the kit. The gearbox can now be turned back 90 degrees and slid into place. Now, I had to jiggle the gearbox a little bit while pushing it through just so it would mesh properly with the pinion gear. Then I could reinstall the 3 bolts, holding the gearbox in place. Back over to the pulley side, I reinstalled the spacer ring as well as the keyway before installing the sprocket and tightening that back down. After sliding the belt back into place, you can line up the sprocket and chain and reattach the bolts on the drive belt side and the snap rings on the gearbox side. Up next, I stretch the spring back onto the chain tensioner to hold it in place. Then, attach the cutter head lock plate, install the blower blade cover, and tighten the 3 thumb screws. Which was followed by reinstalling the 2 side covers. And then finally, I could reinstall the hand crank and the top cover to the planer. Okay, so going back in time, I use this free decibel meter app with the old cutter head to measure the noise level of the stock cutter head. With the new spiral cutter head in place, it was a noticeable difference in how loud the planer was running. And the finish the cutter head left? Oh man, super impressed. Even with this quilted maple, which is typically prone to chip out. Easily my favorite feature of a spiral cutting head is if you get a chip in one of the inserts, it's super easy just to loosen that insert and give it a quarter turn to a fresh, untouched side, as opposed to having to replace an entire set of knives. Huge shout out to Busy Bee for supporting my channel and sending me this upgrade for my Dewalt planer. Guys, if you haven't checked this upgrade out yet, I've linked it below. The install was super easy, definitely something that can be tackled on a Saturday afternoon. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do so you can see some of the other builds that I have coming up. I've also linked some other videos, maybe here and over here, that you can check out as well. So thanks again, guys, and we'll see you on the next project.